There's really like two things going on with me this morning. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, the future is super bright. I hate that it ended the way that it did. Not that it ended in a loss. Yeah. I hate that. But that it ended in a loss where it was just it was just so mistake ridden. You didn't, they put a D+ at best effort out there.
You know what, though? I'm actually kind of glad that it did. I mean, normally we'd be on here like 12 hours after the game was over, and I'd still be going through my 6 stages of grief. I like to do it in 4 stages because, I'm optimized. But I'm glad that it happened that way because it gave them a very realistic picture of where they are.
I agree with that. I do agree with that. Yep.
Yeah. Like the offensive line and the offense in general, they had 6 pre-snap penalties in the first quarter. I mean, it was it was astounding how bad and ill-prepared and inept they were. And the offensive line they peed down their legs. I mean, it looked like it was like trying to catch a water balloon that was thrown at you, like at 98 miles per hour. They didn't know what to do. And between the crowd noise, the Ravens defense moving around and with their pre-snap rotations and the defensive line shifting alignments and everything, they were just completely lost. And it ended up with CJ being more sped up than we've seen him in a while. He looked more like a rookie in terms of he just couldn't trust the pass protection. There were times the pass protection was so bad, and then there were times that even when he would have had a pocket and he could have stepped up, like he has in the last few weeks, he stepped up into the pocket even when it wasn't perfect and delivered it downfield. This time he's fleeing the pocket out of 4-man rushes, throwing off base, just desperate. And it was just a complete annihilation by the Ravens defense. That defense is really something else.
Yeah, and I think I 100% agree with your sentiment about it sends you into the offseason with a much more realistic view than if they'd lost. If the Ravens had made a bunch of mistakes in that game and you lose 31-27 or something like that.
Yeah.
This absolutely is a reminder of just how much needs to get fixed, particularly on the offensive side of the football. With the offensive line, which who knows if they get healthy and maybe health is part of that. For everybody out there saying, boy, you know what they need to go into the offseason and they need to go get some more offensive linemen and some new offensive linemen. They can do that, but it's going to cost them to do that. I mean, they are very committed financially and draft capital-wise to this group of guys. So, I mean, that's the thing that, heading into the offseason, Seth, is there's things I'm super optimistic about. CJ at the top of that list, obviously, and D'Amico. But then there's other things where I go, I don't know what the fix is necessarily for the offensive line in the running game, Well,
and that's the one area where I'm a big Bobby Slowick fan, but, as much as they were hampered by injuries and whatnot, the run game has to improve, and their ability to withstand a lot of the things that the Ravens were doing in terms of deception pre-snap, they just have to get better at that. On the offensive line alone. That's one part of Bobby Slowick being a passing game coordinator makes me a little bit nervous, and that the run in this offense, it can't just be, hey, we're running to set up the play action. Like, yeah, that's great. And, everybody will tell you that you don't have to actually run the ball well to set up the play action. You just have to commit to the run. That's true, and yet if you don't run the ball well, all of a sudden it's 3rd and freaking 10,
right,
as you're setting up that play action. Like, that's great, but it raises the level of difficulty. At some point, you got to be able to run the ball. If this is going to be your offense, which I'm all for, you have to be able to run the ball, and when they need to run the ball, they're just atrocious at it.
14 carries, 38 yards. That included a 16-yard run, so you take out the 16-yard run by Singletary, and you got 13 carries for 22 yards, and it's just
on a down-in, down-out basis, it was really depressing.
It was bad, and as CJ pointed out, it felt like we were back in like week 4 or 5. CJ in the post game talking about being in 3rd and long the whole time, not being able to get the run game going, penalties, 11 penalties for 70 yards, and as you pointed out, Seth, so many of them on both sides of the ball. Honestly, most of them were offensively, but then. The closest I've seen D'Amico Ryans to exploding on the sidelines, Jonathan Grenard jumping off sides on 1st and 10, where Baltimore is clearly letting the clock run down to get to the 4th quarter. And he jumps off sides and gives them 5 free yards and gives them a 1st and 5 deep in their own territory.
And I think the important thing about that, too, is it's not like these were fluke pre-snap penalties because of this. Like, Jonathan Grenard also had a really, really atrocious read on a zone read. You know, he just he bid on run.
Yeah.
And Lamar Jackson just had it was there for the taking, you know, because nobody unless there was a backer that was supposed to scrape over the top, whoever screwed that up, they screwed it up really, really badly. Yeah. And I think so the pre-snap penalties, to me, were just part of some of the same things that happened during play, like the actual plays, where they were outmanned and outclassed. Like, this happens to, like, green recruits in the military. They might be perfect marksmen, but they get into live combat and they're spraying it all over the place, you know? And I feel like they just saw the actual enemy for the first time.
Yeah.
Like, they've been awesome in the simulator. Like, wow, look at this. The guy will shoot up a video game like nobody's business. Then he gets out into the real crap, and the Ravens are coming at him they're just appearing out of the jungle, and these guys they all peed their pants.
Yeah.
They're crying for mama.
Yeah, it was bad. If there was a point in the game, look, that as bad as they were playing in the first half, I mean, you and I were watching the game together. I'm like, man, I can't. They're tied at 10 right now. Like they played about as badly offensively as you could possibly play. And not only were they tied at 10, they had a chance to go into the locker room at halftime, actually leading in this game. And I think ultimately the Ravens probably do what they do in the second half, anyways. They're just a much better football team than the Texans. But if you're going to make them feel a little game pressure, if you're going to make Lamar Jackson feel a little bit like, oh my God, this feels like other playoff losses I've had, especially given the way the defense stood up nicely in the second quarter of that game. They got 3 straight 3-and-outs in that game. D'Amico's high-risk push-the-chips-to-the-middle-of-the-table approach was working for a few series there. Missing that field goal at the end of the half. Like, if we're going to dig into the nooks and crannies of this game and act like they may have had a chance in this thing, if there were a juncture in this game where they would have made the Ravens feel a little something, it was towards the end of the half where Ka'imi Fairbairn had a chance to give the team a lead going into the locker room at halftime, and he didn't. And here's D'Amico Ryans on the missed field goal. Listen to the words he uses here.
Yeah, would have loved to make the field goal there. Emi has done a great job for us all year. But yeah, of course, that kind of zaps the momentum when you miss one, but still doesn't. It's not an excuse for the way we finished there in the second half.
Zap the momentum is the perfect word. That's what it felt like. It felt like, my God, they might go in with a little house money at halftime here.
I think this is the other part of it, too, is for D'Amico to use that strategy of blitzing the hell out of them like they did, 75% blitz rate, which is absurd. It's like 3 times as much as they typically blitz, right. 3.5 times as much as they typically blitz. That it was only going to work under 2 circumstances. One, if the Ravens offense didn't see it that much, which meant that the Texans offense would have to sustain some drives so the Texans could use that strategy selectively. And 2 was if the Ravens felt like they needed to push the ball downfield. You know, if the Texans had a lead or what have you, then the Ravens wouldn't have been just so comfortable kind of dinking and dunking. So, because that's what they did in the second half. The Ravens came out and they're like, all right, it's going to be that kind of game. We're just going to take all this stuff underneath. Mm-hmm. Lamar started getting rid of the ball real quickly, except for the one time where he held on to it for like 9 seconds and had a deep strike downfield.
Yeah.
You know, like they were a very, very intelligent football team in the second half after they had realized what the blitz strategy was going to be. So full credit to Todd Monken, Lamar Jackson, and the Ravens offensive line. They adjusted to it perfectly. A lot of times halftime adjustments are overrated. The Ravens came right out and said, like, yeah, that's what we did in the second half. We stopped trying to develop anything downfield. We kept everything short. We got rid of the ball quickly, and then there you have it.
Yep. So disappointing end to what was for me at least. This was the most fun I've had covering the Texans since I got to the station. I've been with the station. This is my 10th season covering the Texans. I was hired here the same day Bill O'Brien was hired with the Texans. So I had 6 seasons of Bill O'Brien.
Yeah, you're basically like the Brian Windhorst.
3 seasons. I am. Yeah. Whether he likes it or not.
You're about to go to Columbus.
Yeah. And then the last 3 years or whatever it's been, and then this year. This was by far the most fun season to cover this team, and I think it's going to be a whole lot of fun moving forward. But you're right. I think Saturday, Seth, as a reminder, Nick Caserio needs a big offseason this year. Schedule gets harder. Your losses at the end of the year were bad losses. Like when you lost royally at the end of the year. There were there were a lot of close wins. There were no close losses at the end of the year.
I guess the one part of it is that, okay, the one loss to the Browns was with a backup quarterback, two backup quarterbacks. So that one doesn't bother me as much. I can kind of write that one off my mind. That one last night, or that one on Saturday, I'm optimistic. I like the fact that C.J. Stroud and everybody else has a realistic assessment of, okay, all right, there will be zero feeling amongst them like, wow, like the Jaguars last year. You got the feeling that the Jaguars all offseason long had all this praise heaped on them, and it was just going to be a matter of like, oh, I guess we'll just show up and we'll be one of the darlings of the league. Like there will be no illusions by the Texans.